Example 3. Establish the identity 2 times the secant squared of alpha is equal to 1 over 1 minus sine alpha plus 1 over 1 plus the sine of alpha. All right, so we've got to establish this identity. So we know we need to pick the most complicated side to start with, which here is clearly the right side. And then we need to use established identities and algebraic manipulation to achieve the left-hand side. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and write down the right-hand side of this identity. So we're going to get 1 over 1 minus sine of alpha plus 1 over 1 plus the sine of alpha, okay? So your gut instinct hopefully tells you I'm adding 2 fractions here, so I probably should combine them into 1 fraction. So let's do that. Since we're adding the fractions, we need to get a common denominator here. And again, if the trig is involved here, so it might be a little more difficult to tell what that is, but the easiest thing to do in this situation is just multiply the denominators together and you will have your common denominator, okay? I'm going to take the fraction on the left and write it down, okay? So the common denominator, let's go up here. The common denominator is going to be just the 2 denominators multiplied together. So it's going to be the package deal 1 minus sine of alpha times the package deal 1 plus the sine of alpha. You need parentheses around both quantities, okay? So when I look at this first fraction, it's got this part of the denominator present, but it's missing this piece, the 1 plus sine of alpha. So to make it have the denominator we want, we're going to multiply the denominator by 1 plus the sine of alpha, okay? So if we multiply the bottom by that quantity, we have to multiply the top by that same quantity, okay? So essentially we're multiplying by 1 plus sine alpha over 1 plus sine alpha. So we're not really changing the fraction itself, okay? So that's what we need to do to this fraction on the left. We're going to keep our plus sign in the middle. Now we're going to take the fraction on the right, which is 1 plus the sine of alpha. Again, we need this fraction to have the correct denominator. This time the fraction has, this part of the denominator. It has the 1 plus sine alpha. It is missing the 1 minus sine alpha. So we're going to go ahead and multiply the bottom by 1 minus sine alpha so that it has the correct denominator going forward. But if we multiply the bottom by that quantity, we have to multiply the top by that quantity, okay? Because then we will be multiplying by 1 minus sine alpha over 1 minus sine alpha, which is essentially 1. We're not changing the fraction, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and do some algebra here, okay? So in this first fraction, okay, I'm going to go ahead and write down the denominators. I'm not going to multiply them out. I'm going to leave them as 1 minus sine alpha times 1 plus sine alpha, okay? You're just multiplying fractions here, so you need to multiply across the top and across the bottom. So in the numerator, 1 times 1 plus sine of alpha is just going to give us 1 plus sine alpha, okay? Then I'm going to have my plus sign in the middle, and this stuff on the right, okay, again, the denominators, I'm not going to FOIL them out. I'm just going to write them down as you see them. So the quantity 1 plus sine alpha times the quantity 1 minus the sine of alpha, and then I'll multiply the numerators. So 1 times 1 minus the sine of alpha is going to be 1 minus the sine of alpha, okay? All right, so you may be wondering, why haven't you multiplied out the denominators yet, okay? And you can do that, but generally what I do when I'm verifying identities, I don't multiply something out until I absolutely have to. So like eventually, if I get to a point in the verification process and I realize I'm not going anywhere, then I might go ahead and multiply out the bottom, okay? So I really don't multiply anything until I feel like I have to, okay? All right, so now we are adding 2 fractions that have the same denominator, so we can combine them into 1. So we're going to keep that same denominator when we combine them into 1 fraction. And then since we're adding, we're just going to add the quantities across the top. Okay, so the numerator is going to be 1 plus sine of alpha plus 1 minus the sine of alpha. Okay, all right, so now we can do some simplification in the numerator. I've got a positive sine alpha and a negative sine alpha. Those guys are going to cancel. I'm left with 1 plus 1. That's going to combine to give me 2 in the numerator. Okay, so then I've got this denominator here, okay? And I'm going to go back and look at what I'm trying to achieve. Okay, I'm trying to get the left side, which is 2 times the secant squared of alpha. Okay, I'm nowhere close to that, so I feel the need. Let me go ahead and FOIL out the denominator. Okay, so if we FOIL, we're going to multiply the first terms together. 1 times 1 is 1. And then we're going to do the outer terms. 1 times positive sine alpha is going to be plus sine alpha. And then we're going to multiply the inner terms. So negative sine alpha times 1 is going to be minus sine alpha. And then we need to multiply the last terms together. So negative sine alpha times positive sine alpha is going to be negative sine squared alpha. Okay, so we went ahead and multiplied out the denominator. Okay, hopefully that gets us closer to our goal here. Okay, in the bottom, I see a positive sine alpha and a negative 1. These guys cancel, and you are going to be left with 2 in the numerator and 1 minus sine squared alpha in the denominator. Okay, at this point, we can use the Pythagorean identity that the sine squared alpha plus the cosine squared of alpha is equal to 1. Okay, this denominator is 1 minus sine squared alpha. So if we subtract sine squared alpha from both sides in the Pythagorean identity, we get that 1 minus sine squared alpha is equal to cosine squared of alpha. Okay, all right, so this is going to be 2 in the numerator. 1 minus the sine squared of alpha is equivalent to the cosine squared of alpha. Okay, so that's going to be your new denominator. Okay, and then you have 2 over cosine squared, okay, alpha. So if you basically have 1 over cosine, okay, of alpha times 1 over cosine alpha. Okay, let's do it this way so it's clear. Okay, in this next step I'm about to do, you can omit if you want to go straight to the conclusion here. But remember, this is 2 over 1 times 1 over cosine of alpha times 1 over cosine of alpha. Okay, because if you multiply these 3 fractions together, you would multiply the numerators. 2 times 1 is 2. And then the bottoms, 1 times cosine of alpha times cosine of alpha is cosine squared of alpha. So this is going to be 2 times 1 over cosine of alpha is the secant of alpha times 1 over cosine of alpha is the secant of alpha. Okay, and then at the very bottom, the last step here, you're going to get 2 times secant is going to give you secant squared. Okay, so you'll get 2 times the secant squared of alpha, and that is your goal. Okay, so we basically started off, we have verified the identity. Okay, we started off with the most complicated part of the equation, which was the right-hand side. Okay, we realized that we were adding 2 fractions, so we went ahead and performed the addition and combined those guys into 1 fraction. Okay, and then we did some algebra and applied the Pythagorean identity that the sine squared alpha plus the cosine squared of alpha is equal to 1. Okay, and did some more algebraic manipulation, and we were able to get our goal of the left-hand side, which is 2 times the secant squared of alpha. We're done.